Welcome, curious minds, and welcome back to 1125's YouTube channel for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really big question, one that sparks endless debate, how much do the wealthy really pay in taxes? And maybe more importantly, what does that actually mean for the rest of us? Just quickly, this is our finance segment. We try to explore global and local stuff using sharp, data-driven storytelling. Cut through the noise.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic. And it's complex, isn't it? People see it through such different lenses. We've actually gathered quite a stack of sources for this one. We've got reports from Oxfam, LSE Research, detailed looks at wealth tax ideas from the Peterson Foundation, and even pulled some insights from some pretty lively online debates.
Okay, great. So our mission today is basically to cut through that noise, like you said.
Right.
Let's clarify some definitions, look at the different angles, the data, so you can really get a handle on what's actually at stake here. All right, let's unpack this. So you often hear these completely conflicting things, right? On one side, you see data saying the wealthy contribute a huge amount to tax revenues, like they're carrying a lot of the weight.
That's right. The initial numbers can certainly look that way. I mean, take the U.S., for example.
Yeah.
Figures cited, I think it was from the Tax Foundation, they show the top 1% of income earners.
Huh.
Their share of federal income taxes paid, it jumped to nearly 46% in 2021.
46%.
Yeah, and they earned about 26% of all income, so paying a bigger share than their income share. And similarly, the top 50% of taxpayers, they paid almost 98% of all federal individual income taxes. So yeah, on the surface, that sounds like a lot, a very significant contribution.
Okay, so that definitely sounds like they pay a lot, but then, like almost in the same breath, you hear these claims
Right.
that the super rich, the billionaires, pay very little tax, sometimes even, less than their secretary or an average worker. So how can both things be true? What's going on there? It seems totally contradictory.
Well, the key often lies in how we define income, and crucially, how different types of income get taxed. Our research, looking at the LSE work for the UK, it shows that while, high-earning employees might pay those top income tax rates, well, a substantial minority of the rich actually end up paying much lower overall effective tax rates.
Lower overall rates, but why? Is it like they're finding loopholes or something?
It's often less about secret loopholes and more about where the money comes from, the source. So things like investment income or capital gains, that's the profit when you sell an asset like stocks or property. Those are often taxed at lower rates than income from a job, like your salary. There was some pretty stark data from the UK back in 2015-16. It showed someone earning, say, £1 million. In a mix of taxable income and gains, they could end up paying an average tax rate of just 35%.
Okay, 35%.
But here's the kicker. That was the same average rate as someone earning only £100,000, mostly from salary.
Wow. The same rate?
Yeah, and in some cases, that millionaire's rate could drop as low as 11%, similar to someone earning just £15,000. So it really highlights how the system itself, structurally, often treats wealth generation differently than wage earning. It's baked into the design.
Right. So it's not just how much you make, but how you make it. The type of income matters a lot to the tax code. And that brings up another term you hear all the time, unrealized gains. What exactly are those? Why are they so central to this whole debate? Yes. Unrealized gains. They're a huge piece of the puzzle. Basically, it's the increase in value of an asset you own stocks, maybe real estate, maybe a whole company that you haven't sold yet.
So it's profit on paper, but not cash in hand.
Exactly. You bought a stock for $100, now it's worth $1,000.
Yeah.
That $900 increase, that's an unrealized gain. Now, the argument is that these massive gains represent real economic power, real potential liquidity, even if you haven't sold. But under most current tax codes, you don't pay tax on that gain until you actually realize it, until you sell the asset and get the cash.
Okay, I get it. And we also need to think beyond just federal income tax, right? That's just one piece.
Absolutely.
That's
That's crucial. Federal income tax, is often progressive higher earners pay a higher percentage, but then you have other taxes, like FICA in the U.S. that funds Social Security and Medicare, and state taxes, local taxes, sales taxes. Many of those can actually be regressive.
Regressive meaning? Meaning they take a larger percentage of income from lower earners. Think about sales tax. Someone earning less might spend almost all their income paying sales tax on most of it. A higher earner saves more, so proportionally less of their income goes to sales tax. So when you zoom out and look at the total tax burden, all these taxes combined, some analysis suggests the very, very top, like the top 0.01%, might actually pay the lowest effective rate overall.
Wow. Okay. So this discussion about how income is taxed and how wealth grows, it naturally leads us to the sheer scale of it all. The amount of wealth concentrated at the very top, it's honestly hard to wrap your head around the numbers sometimes.
It really is. The figures are astronomical. Take the Oxfam data, the wealth of the world's 3,000 or so billionaires. It surged by $6.5 trillion in real terms over the last decade.
$6.5 trillion.
Yeah, just put that in perspective. That's like 14.6% of global output. It's huge. And the richest 1% globally. They gained at least $33.9 trillion in that time. Oxfam calculated that's enough to end annual global poverty 22 times over.
That's mind-boggling. It just feels like wealth isn't just concentrated, it's accelerating almost, growing faster than anything else.
That seems to be the trend. Look at the UK again. Number of billionaires went from about 15 in 1990 to 165 in 2024.
15 to 165.
Yep. And their average wealth increased by over 1,000% in that time. Oxfam even makes the claim that globally, billionaires might be paying effective tax rates somewhere around 0.3% of their total wealth, which is, starkly different from typical wage earners.
0.3% of wealth.
And connecting this to the bigger picture, private wealth worldwide has apparently been growing 8 times faster than the net wealth of governments, looking at the period from 1995 to 2023, which of course raises big questions about resources, public services, and where society's wealth is actually ending up.
Okay, so if the system has these features, lower rates on capital gains, no tax on unrealized gains until sold, how do the ultra-wealthy actually navigate this? What are the strategies they use perfectly legally to sort of maximize their wealth and minimize their tax bill within these rules?
Right, and many of these are, as you say, perfectly legal and quite sophisticated. It goes beyond just benefiting from lower capital gains rates. A big one is leveraging assets. Wealthy individuals can use their large portfolios, stocks, bonds, whatever, as collateral to get very low-interest loans.
Borrowing against their wealth.
Exactly. And they use these loans for, well, anything. Big purchases, luxury goods, even just living expenses. Instead of selling assets and triggering that capital gains tax, they borrow. So they turn those unrealized gains into usable cash without a taxable event happening immediately.
And the debt.
Well, the debt can often be paid off later, maybe with more debt, or eventually when assets are sold, perhaps strategically at a lower tax point, or even passed on at death with different tax implications. It creates a cycle.
So it's almost like living off the growth of your wealth without ever actually cashing out in a way that triggers significant income tax along the way.
That's a good way to put it, precisely. Other common methods. Shifting assets into things like private foundations or certain types of trusts or nonprofits. These can shelter assets from income tax or reduce future estate taxes. Real estate investors can benefit from depreciation deductions. That lets them reduce their taxable income based on the theoretical wear and tear of a property, even if the property's market value is actually going up.
Right, I've heard of that.
And investing in things like municipal bonds, the income from those is often exempt from federal tax. Plus, large charitable contributions can provide significant tax deductions, lowering the overall amount of income that's subject to tax. It's all part of navigating the system as it exists.
Okay, so walking through all this, the different tax treatments, the scale of wealth, the strategies, it definitely paints a picture that makes some people feel the system needs reform.
Yeah.
So what are the solutions being talked about? What are the main ideas on the table to address these perceived disparities?
Well, one idea that came up in the LSE research is something called an alternative minimum tax.
An AMT.
Sort of, but tailored. The idea would be to set a floor, say a minimum tax rate of 35% on all taxable income and gains above a certain high threshold, like maybe £100,000 in the UK example. The estimate was that this could raise billions each year, specifically by targeting those high earners who currently manage to pay very low overall rates without really affecting most other taxpayers.
Okay, so setting a minimum floor. And then, of course, there's the really big one that always sparks debate, the wealth tax. What exactly is that and how is it supposed to work?
Right, the wealth tax, it's usually proposed as an annual tax. It's levied not on income, but on an individual's or household's total net worth. So you add up all their assets, property, stocks, bonds, art, yachts, everything, subtract all their debts. And if the net amount is above a certain high exemption level, they pay a percentage, maybe 1% or 2%, on the value above that level each year.
So a tax on just having wealth. above a certain point.
Exactly. Proponents, like those cited by the Peterson Foundation, they argue it would make the tax system much more progressive. They see it as a way to tackle rising inequality directly and also generate potentially substantial revenue. Some economists, like Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zuckman, they estimated that even a 1% wealth tax just on U.S. households with wealth over $50 million could bring in around $94 billion a year.
94 billion annually. That's not insignificant. And you mentioned some countries are already pushing for this, right? At the G20.
Yeah, there's definitely momentum in some quarters. Spain, Brazil, Germany, South Africa, they signed onto a motion at the G20 pushing for a global minimum tax of 2% on the super rich. Forecasts suggested that could potentially net up to $250 billion globally in extra revenue.
Wow.
And in the UK, there was a wealth tax commission that looked into it. They recommended a one-off wealth tax on millionaire couples, estimating it could raise something like $260 billion. So the idea is definitely being seriously considered.
Okay, so if it could raise that much revenue and address inequality, it sounds potentially appealing. Why isn't it more common then? What are the big hurdles or arguments against it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the billion-dollar question here.
Hmm.
There are some major challenges. Critics raise serious points about enforcement. How do you accurately value all assets every single year, especially non-financial things like private art collections or classic cars or, complex private businesses? Valuation can be really subjective and difficult.
Right. Valuing a Picasso versus valuing a publicly traded stock seems very different.
Exactly. And then there are huge concerns about tax evasion and what's called capital flight. The worry is that if you impose a wealth tax, the wealthiest individuals might just move their assets or even themselves to countries that don't have such a tax.
And has that actually happened? Have countries tried this and then backed away because of these problems?
Historically, yes. It's quite telling. Back in 1994, there were 12 OECD countries, that's the group of developed economies, that had net wealth taxes. By 2022, only 4 were left: Colombia, Norway, Spain, and Switzerland.
Only 4, so 8 countries got rid of them.
That's right. Countries like Austria, Finland, Germany, Sweden, they all repealed their wealth taxes. And the reasons they cited were pretty consistent. It was difficult and costly to administer. There were problems with people not complying, and it did lead to some wealthy individuals and their capital leaving the country. Plus, the actual revenue generated by the wealth taxes that do exist, it tends to be a relatively small slice of the country's total tax pie, a modest proportion of GDP compared to income or consumption taxes. And specifically in the U.S., there's always been a background question about whether a federal wealth tax would even be constitutional, given historical rules about direct taxes needing to be apportioned among the states. Even the OECD itself kind of sums it up by noting there are, quote, limited arguments for having a net wealth tax in addition to broad-based personal capital income taxes and well-designed inheritance and gift taxes, suggesting maybe fixing the systems is a better approach.
Okay, so it's definitely not a simple picture at all, is it? The question of whether the rich pay their fair share. It's clearly not just about looking at one tax rate or one absolute number. It's about effective rates across all taxes. It's about how different kinds of income and wealth are treated. It's about the very structure of the tax system itself. It's this really complex tapestry woven with data, but also with social values and political choices.
Indeed. And I think understanding these nuances, getting past the simple headlines is key. It helps you have a more informed view on who pays what, why they pay that amount, and what the potential ripple effects are for inequality, for funding public services, for the whole shape of our society. It lets us ask much better questions, I think.
Absolutely. So as you listening reflect on all this, maybe consider this. We live in this incredibly interconnected world now, right? Wealth moves across borders so easily, so quickly. What kind of tax system really serves a nation's best interests in the long run? How do you balance needing revenue for public good with keeping economic incentives in place and achieving what society sees as fair? Definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive. And hey, if you found this dive into tax data insightful, please do give us a like, share it with someone who might find it interesting, and subscribe to 1125 for more data-driven insights.